repeat of where we were last time, just to get everyone on board. There were two essential problems we ran into right at the very end of the last session. And those two problems were related to craft that tend to have a bit higher thrust than the script was intended for. It didn't quite handle them very well for a couple of different reasons. So, first I want to reiterate one of the fixes I did off camera, because it matters. As you know, we're in the middle of trying to do a constant altitude burn script to perform a landing in a way that's relatively easy to set up ahead of time. I'm not actually necessarily a big fan of the constant altitude. I'm not really a big fan of the constant altitude burn normally, but in this case I'm using it because it tends to be very easy to set up. You don't have to give the script any information. You just tell it, start your burn wherever the periapsis happens to be. I'll set the periapsis up for you, and then you can take it from there. So it becomes a very easy user interface. Just design your orbit in such a fashion that your periapsis is where you want to start your burn. Alright, so one of the problems we ran into last time was whenever you do a constant altitude burn, you always, at the very end of it, switch to a suicide burn for the last little bit as you drop down to fall to the ground. And during that part, it was guessing the rate, or guessing the time to start the burn a little bit wrong. And we worked out that the reason it was wrong was because the ship is burning a little bit of fuel as it goes. So since it's burning a little bit of fuel as it goes, it's getting slightly less full of mass. And when it becomes slightly smaller in mass, it changes the amount of thrust it can do partway through the burn. So this is a channel where we go over some of. Basically, I'm one of the developers for kOS, a mod for the Kerbal Space Program, and this is a thing where we kind of walk through me using our own mod, so you can kind of see things you can do with it. If you don't know what the kOS mod is, there's links in my channel you can go click on to see what it is. Anyway, back to the thing. Where was the section where the suicide burn happens? I want to show you what I changed from last episode. I think it was in here. Yep. Previously, it would lock the throttle to simply 1 and leave the throttle at 1 the entire time. The difference now is that I'm locking to ship mass divided by start mass. Start mass was set up here. So whatever the mass of the ship was before I began the suicide burn, I set the throttle to a fraction of the current mass over that. So the effect is that if the mass stayed the same, the throttle would stay at 1 the whole time. But as the mass slightly drops, the throttle slightly drops to match, so that it always stays in a constant acceleration, which is what the suicide burn was calculated for. It was calculated as if we were going to perform a constant acceleration burn. Now, this is not a perfect fix, because if you're using Realism Overhaul, you might be using an engine that will not allow you to throttle it nicely back like this. So this is not necessarily a fix for every situation. The actual math to work out exactly how to do the burn when you take into account the fact that you're losing mass as you go is a much more complicated bit of math that I don't want to go into today. I might in a future episode, but it basically involves doing some differential equations, and I don't want to touch that on the fly. That I definitely want to work out ahead of time. That gets tricky and icky. I really wish all these pieces of music would be at the same volume. Okay, anyway. So that was one change I did, that small bit there. The other change I'm going to do today is this. Previously, we had this logic going on. Here's your ship. It has an engine out the back that it's thrusting. And here is the horizontal line of its velocity. And you want to aim up slightly from that so that it stays at a constant altitude as it slows down. And before, what we were doing is sending this into the PID controller. So we had a PID controller that was spitting out this angle when given the vertical speed that we have. So given the vertical speed, it decides what to change the angle to. The more it's dropping, the higher it makes the angle go. The less it's dropping, the lower it makes the angle go, trying to find an angle that holds it at a constant speed. There's a couple of problems with this technique as we looked before, and I'll cover them in two parts. Part one is this. If you are dealing with very small angles, in general, if you have a very tiny angle, the sine of that angle is going to be roughly the same as the angle itself if you're talking radians, which we usually aren't in kOS, but for the moment, let's just think about this for a second as if we were. What you're saying is that the distance here, vertical, and the distance around the circumference of the turn aren't all that different when the angle is very small. So in this case, you can treat them as if they're kind of the same thing. But that stops working once you get up to bigger angles. Because once you start getting up to bigger angles, you increase the angle this way, and only a small fraction of that translates into an actual vertical change. So as you get to a higher angle, the amount of angular change is not one-to-one with the amount of vertical change anymore. And so what this ends up doing is it makes this PID controller operating on a thing that isn't quite linear. The angle, when it's small, is relatively close to being linear with the change in vertical velocity, but it stops being linear with it when the angle starts getting big. So this is problem number one. But that wasn't really the problem we were running into, but it is a problem. Problem number two is the one we were running into, which is this. Let's say you have a vessel which has a relatively small thrust. If it has a relatively small thrust, then at some particular angle, you get this much vertical component of that thrust. If that engine has exactly the same angle, but has a much bigger thrust, I guess I should say thrust to weight, because we're actually talking about the acceleration you get, then that same angle produces a much larger vertical amount. And the problem is that we were trying to adjust our fall, or based upon how far we're falling, how fast we're falling, we were trying to adjust the angle. And that's going to vary tremendously from one ship design to another, what the appropriate balancing act is between how much angle we should change for how much vertical velocity we're trying to correct. My original script was set to treat them about 1-to-1. 1 degree gives you about 1 meter per second of change, roughly. That's what I tuned the PID controller to. And that's fine for some engines, but that tuning doesn't work for everything. You'd have to have a different tuning for every engine because this ratio is different depending on what kind of thrust you have. So, what we really want to do is change this to something where the output of the PID controller is something that is directly related to the vertical velocity in a way that's not quite so disconnected as this angle is. So what I'm going to change it to is this. Instead of picking the angle based on what the PID controller says, we will instead have the PID controller output this. the PID controller now will be outputting just the simple vertical magnitude of this. How much of this thrust should we have? And then we'll calculate backward from that what the angle we actually want is. And the way to do that is actually not that hard, because if we're talking about things in terms of thrust, then this is basically a right triangle. Are you guys not hearing me at all? Really? You should have said something much, much sooner. Because I'm getting sound according to my end of it. Are you guys not getting sound on yours? According to what I'm seeing, I'm outputting sound. Are you guys not getting any sound on your end? Double check to make sure you didn't accidentally hit the mute button. There is a little mute button under the stream. Anyway, where was I? So if we have this as basically a standard right triangle, and the PID controller is spitting out effectively this leg of the triangle, if we're thinking of this in terms of acceleration, or even in terms of thrust, because we could also do this in terms of thrust if we want. Nah, let's do it in terms of acceleration. It's actually, there's reasons that's easier. Well, we know this hypotenuse. This is the total amount of acceleration that the ship is capable of putting out, which is basically its thrust divided by its mass. So we actually know the length of this hypotenuse. Therefore, if we're trying to work out what this angle is indirectly, then we kind of know that, because it's just this length over this length. Let's call this the V for now. Is the sine of that angle. Therefore, if we need to know the angle, it's the arc sine of this. So, this is the basic logic I'm going to change my controller to. I'm still going to use this angle. I will still do this, but my angle will be calculated indirectly. The PID controller will not be spitting the angle out. Instead, it will be spitting the vertical length of this triangle out, from which I will reverse engineer the angle. Okay, so let's try that and see what happens. I may be doing the wrong thing, but we'll see. So in here is where I was doing my angle work before. So now I will change this. First of all, let's retune this PID controller, because I think if I'm doing 1-for-1, I want something roughly like that. I think I can make this symmetrical. Now the difference is that this aim up angle shall be different. Instead of setting the aim up angle to this, we will set the aim up acceleration to that. The aim up angle will be the let's see, the current available thrust, I think is what I'm looking for? Yeah. The current available thrust divided by the current mass is the amount of acceleration I have total. So I put that in the denominator underneath the aim up acceleration, and that is the sine of the angle we want. I think that that is correct. I hope that that is correct. Now, in addition to printing this, I will also print actually, no, let's just leave it at that. We'll see what happens at first. If it doesn't work, I'll add more stuff to print. So let's give it a go. As before, I'll be using a bit of cheating with HyperEdit to just put the ships out there to test this with. Always the fun way to do it. Unfortunately, if this doesn't work quite so well today, I won't have a lot of time to try it 20 different times, so I may end up leaving the Twitch stream with this still not working, which would be unfortunate, but that may happen. Okay. Let's put myself around... Where did we try last time? Tylo, I think it was. Let's put myself around Tylo. Let's go a little higher up. Where am I now? There I am. So there we are, around Tylo. Let's not forget to do this before we get very much further. Okay. Hey, looky there. It's our previous debris from our other attempt. Let's go to... Actually, let's put this a little higher up before I start playing around with it. Ah! I hate that. I so hate that. There are times HyperEdit can be kind of annoying to work with. So imagine that we were actually setting this up the more proper way in-game with a maneuver node and everything. Does that look like it's missing? Let's up that just ever so slightly. Yeah, that'll do. That's really tight. Okay, so let's try it like that. Whoops, what did I type wrong? Unexpected token A at line 58. Oh. There we go. Okay, so waiting until after apoapsis. So we wait. Oh, that's right. Annoying time warp limits on this planet. All right. Well, looks like unfortunately we got to sit here and wait at 10 times warp. Oh, sorry, I forgot about that problem with Tylo. I mean, this is 64 kilometers up. It's kind of an absurd limitation there. I suppose it's because of how fast I have to keep redrawing the polygons. They don't like doing it when you're too low in. Oh well. So, anyone got any questions in the chat while we wait to get around to the other side of this planet? Or moon, I guess, technically. Come on, come on. Yeah, sorry about this, everyone. I forgot that it was going to be this long of a wait because it won't let you time warp on this world. Now it dropped me down to 1. Let me see if I can... I'll have to get the rest of the way around at 4 times. Oh gosh, 6 minutes? Oh, for crying out loud. I wonder if it'd be faster to re-edit this and bring it in on a higher arc so that it doesn't spend nearly as long of its time at low altitude. I think the reason that the main game has these altitude-based warp limits... Let me just turn this off. I think the reason the main game has these altitude-based warp limits is that when you're down close to the ground, it has to constantly redraw all these polygons and bring new ones up as the planet rotates around you. And I suspect the process of doing that doesn't work very well when it has to do it really quickly, because you're zooming around the planet fast, really down close to it. If you're higher up away from the planet, the polygons aren't nearly as densely packed together. It can be much more fuzzy and crude about it. So I suspect that's why the main game puts those limits in there. I'm not quite sure why the numbers are what they are for certain planets, though. Okay, according to Kerbal Engineer, we're almost at periapsis. I really hope this doesn't suddenly bomb out because I screwed something up in the script, because we are really low. Which is how you should be for this. Secured something up in the script. Division by 0! Fun! Where did I do that? Well, I supposedly did that. At 58. Uh-oh. Well, we're gone. Oh well, nothing to look at on the screen now. I might as well put this up here. So supposedly I divided by 0 here. Why might that be? Well, the ship mass isn't 0. The available thrust... It didn't stage yet. Because it didn't stage yet, the engines weren't on, and therefore the available thrust wasn't there. Okay. Fine. Then, in that case, let's do this. Protect against the divide by 0. Hardcode that until such a time as it wakes up and does the staging, and then this should work fine. Alright, so that fixes that divide by 0. Let's go back to the quick save, and go back to the hyperedit. Let's make this less annoying. I will go to a much higher orbit. Up the eccentricity a bit. Move the periapsis down there a bit. To there. And then lower the periapsis a bit. Let's make it more eccentric as I do it. You know, it'd be really nice if you could type periapsis on this particular screen, but you can't, so you gotta do it indirectly. Let's stick with that for now. Okay, so let's try it again in this state. And you know what? I'm actually going to quick save in this state, so I don't have to do this again. There we go, that's better. Yeah, 1x can't go faster than 1x when below 30 kilometers. That is so annoyingly arbitrary. Okay, here we come in. Okay, that looks like we'll be okay. I'm predicting badness here. I don't have good confidence in my own first test code here. Especially with that coming up. Okay, here we go. 7 seconds to go. Whoa! Boy, I can't wait until we get Brad's better steering code in here. Because, wow, that's horrible. Aside from the fact that we have wobbly steering, which isn't me doing that, that's the lock steering code not being so great, it looks better than it did before. This is more stable. Now let's see how the suicide burn part goes. Should be able to see our shadow somewhere. Where's the sun? There, okay, so our shadow should be this way. Well, right. Now, it seems to believe that it had a final touchdown speed of only 5 meters a second, but that did not look like 5 meters a second to me. That looked pretty catastrophic. I don't know about you guys, but I don't believe that. 5 meters a second is pretty survivable, and that was not 5 meters a second. Let's see, where is that printing from? Touchdown at speed of touch speed. Touch speed is the surface velocity magnitude at the point where the status set landed. I suppose maybe at the moment of impact it doesn't switch to status landed yet. That could be. I wonder how I would fix that. Also, while I'm at it, 5 was definitely not enough safety margin. Let's go with 10. Alright, let's give it another go. Only this time, I think I'm going to turn this gimbal off. or at least limit it by quite a bit. And I don't know why this ladder is starting out extended. Alright, let's try that. Oops, hold on a second. There, better. One thing you're not seeing behind the scenes is that when I edit this code, I'm actually not editing it in my actual archive. I instead run a script in this little shell that copies it to the archive, and I had forgotten to do that. So it's the same thing, slightly higher safety margin and distance, and I tamed the gimbal on this engine by a lot. Can't wait until we get to show you some of Brad's better steering. I've seen some videos of what he was been working on, and it looks way better. The lock steering is so much smoother now. But it's not in my current version that I'm showing on the stream. Now it starts off tipping down, and I thought that was an error at first until I realized that actually is correct, because as it passes periapsis it actually is starting to travel up again. And it's trying to, and the tipping down was to correct for that, so it actually is doing the right thing. Yeah, once I tamed the gimbal on that engine, now we have much smoother steering. But, again, remember the goal is to try to hold this near constant if it can. Seems to be doing it okay. Probably have to tune the PID controller a little more, but it does look like it's doing it smoothly with the new math, which I like. Now it has a slightly higher safety margin for its suicide burn. Let's see how it goes. And I think part of the reason I need that slightly higher margin is simply the fact that it's falling really fast and my code can only check it maybe 10 times a second or so. So it'll miss the point where it needs to start by a little bit. Still thinks it touched down at 3.3. You know, I wonder if it's just that the engine sticks too far down. It may actually be the craft design that's wrong. Yeah, that probably is just it. I wonder why it's so far off. That is really... You're saying it hit at 20 meters a second. That's... okay. Why would that be? I wonder if I'm slowing this down too much. right here. Oh, no, not right here. Right, where was it? This. Where does it pick the start mass? Here, okay. I wonder what would happen if I staged. Would that break this start mass logic, I wonder? How hard would it be to add meters per second to the altimeter readout on the suicide burn? Yeah, well, the suicide burn doesn't really have a readout. Once it starts, it doesn't say anything anymore. But we could put that in there. The difficulty is that the suicide burn itself has no code running. It just locks this and then waits. So it's right in here, and there's no actual code running during any of this. But I suppose I could just as easily change this, for now, into a loop that actually does something. That's going to spam the screen, but might not be a bad idea just to debug what's going on. Alright, let's try that and just make sure that that's right. Let's see what happens. I keep forgetting. Let's see. Hey, So HVACNG is the person I've been referring to as Brad when I've been talking about our steering code, and he just joined the chat. This is operating on our old steering code, so I had to kill the gimbal on this engine to keep it from wobbling all over the place. But his new steering works much better on things like that. So to bring you up to speed, HVAC, we're trying to figure out why this is slightly hitting the ground a bit too hard. Like, it's coming down at about 20 meters a second at the very end. And at least that's what it kind of looked like. So to verify it, I've put a bunch of print statements in here that's going to spew a lot of stuff to the screen as we come down. Or so I thought it would. Nothing's printing. Now it claims it hit at 3.2 meters a second. We determined that that's not actually true. Because that is printing out after the status becomes landed. See, this didn't do anything. This didn't actually happen. Why didn't this happen? Oh, really? Is that all there was to it? I forgot to do this. That, I think... my own fault. I added this just to make sure I am running my new version, which I don't think I was before. Yeah, as we were discussing before, the time warp limits on Tylo are really annoying. See. Well? Now, once the suicide burn starts, this is supposed to start spewing a lot of text. Zoom out a little bit this time so we can actually watch it as it comes down. Again, nothing prints, and I don't know why. Because this is clearly trying to print, and it doesn't. Oh, I know why. Ah, man. I know exactly why. Let's put this back the way it was, where it was a wait until. That is actually supposed to go up here. And actually, while I'm at it, if we do stage, this needs to reset. But yeah, this is where it actually should be printing. Right here. This is the calculation of throttle. My rationale is I'm trying to keep the acceleration constant. So as the mass goes down, the acceleration, or as the mass goes down, the throttle should go down proportionally with it to keep the acceleration the same, or so I thought. So this is 1.0 at first, and then drops just slightly as you go. But I may be thinking that through wrong. Let's try, now that I'm actually printing it. There we go. Yeah, Planzister. Yeah, this is a mod called kOS, Kerbal operating system, and yeah, it's for scripting your own autopilot systems. It's we like it. It has its own little sort of made-up language. Well, all languages are made up, but you know what I mean. to do this well. Depends on what you mean by well. I mean, I'm one of the people that actually works on the mod, and I keep screwing up and making mistakes when it comes to the actual flying of ships. I'm more into the guts of the language and not so much the actual science of the flying. When it comes to actually trying to make scripts that fly properly, I'm just as much in the dark as anyone else is. But yeah, it's basically... The idea behind it is, if you like the idea of autopilots like MechJeb, but don't like the idea of having it handed to you on a silver platter already working, and you want to have the possibility of screwing it up yourself, then that's sort of what the mod is for. Actually, remote tech is one of the biggest intended uses of kOS. There's supposedly still some problems getting it to work with remote tech, mostly because remote tech is very particular about not allowing other people to control the ship. But we're working on trying to work with them and fix that. But yeah, this particular script is trying to do an automated constant altitude burn landing. The idea being that you could use this script, once we get it all working, with a remote tech installation by using remote tech's maneuver node automator to get the periapsis right down to where you want to do your burn, and then run this script to take it from there. At least that's the intent of this particular script, anyway. Yeah, if you want to read up more about it, just go to the Reddit group /r/KOS, and there'll be all sorts of stuff there about this mod. Alright, this should fail just like it did before, but at least this time we should be getting printouts as it does so. Why are you not printing anything? Ah! Stupid me for not editing directly in the archive. I keep forgetting to do this to my own code. Think about my logic here. This ship mass divided by start mass idea. If, let's say I had 90% of the mass I originally did, hypothetically. So this is 0.9. If I had 90% of my original mass, then thrusting at 90% as high as I did before should give me the same acceleration, shouldn't it? Right? Is my logic wrong there? If I have a certain amount of thrust, and my amount of thrust doesn't change, but my mass does, and I only have 90% as much mass as I did when I started, then 90% as much throttle should give me the same acceleration, shouldn't it? Oh no, I already used that formula somewhere else. Basically here. Yeah. Well, here. Let me show what was happening when I had this at 1 before. Because that was actually working okay, except it was a little too overzealous. Let's turn this down a bit, like we did before. Keep forgetting that, for whatever reason, this started off. Set down. Okay, there we go. I already did, but I'm going to do this again just to be absolutely sure. In fact, let me take this back out again. Ironically, when this goes away, it'll be proof that it's new. Okay, let's get in closer. Now I have to fizz warp because Tylo is annoying. And the whole point of this was to try to time the suicide burn at the end exactly right. And the difficulty with what I did before, which is what you'll see here in a moment, is when I just had it thrust full strength the whole way and didn't take into account the fact that I'm using up fuel and making the craft lighter as it falls, my calculation is too short and I come to a stop above the ground, and then I have to do a little bit of a sort of a down to the ground for the very end. And I was trying to eliminate that, but apparently I got too close to the ground. And there it came to a stop too high, and then had to coast down a little bit from there. Yeah, so that is what it did when I used throttle 1 the whole way down. That's why that's not the perfect solution. And so what I had done to try to fix that was this. And that seems to have the opposite problem of taking just a hair's breadth too long. Suppose it could be monitoring my acceleration by checking my vertical speed each iteration and seeing how it's doing. But I still would like to know why this doesn't work. This should work. Unless leftover thrust. Yeah, I'm not sure why this doesn't work. It seems right to me. Why on earth isn't it? Where are you uploading your full script? Okay, one more go on this before I go to a different topic. Or at least a different world. Space after ship mass shouldn't matter. Dang it, I did it again. Hang on. There. I was so happy that I had this thing working so well on smaller craft, on smaller worlds, but then when I tried doing it on a heavy craft and a heavy world, it wasn't precise enough, which is a shame, because it was working really well on tiny little rovers. Alright, I'll try yours in a moment. Now that I've got the printing working again, I want to try this the broken way, just to see what the printing shows me. I checked against that, Dr. Goddard. I did not actually, I checked. It's the ship mass just before the suicide burn starts. After this attempt, I'll see about HVAC NG's suggested script he's got. I'll see how that works on this very same ship. Okay, the actual touchdown speed was about 20. So that was what we were trying to get before. Well, if you look at the rate here, it looks like maybe it's just a matter of, because of the slight delay in the loop, that it takes a little too long to detect it. I mean, this is the loop that detects when to start the burn, right here. Could it just be that because of the amount of math it has to do, that by the time it detects the situation, it already is a step too late? That could be the case. That it's just because this takes a little bit of time to calculate, it's already a step past where it needs to be when it begins. That is entirely possible. Well, the thing about changing this to weight .001 is that the physics rate, I think, if I remember rightly, the physics rate is actually .004 anyway. Well, I'll come back to this in a moment. I want to try this script that was uploaded here. Can you log the numbers? I'd like to make a graph. I could. It would take a little bit of time to get that going. so impact ETA. Oh, that's right, this. Yeah, you were showing me this before. The problem is that the amount of time I want to spend tonight is not as much time as it would take me to go look at someone else's script. It always takes longer to read someone else's than to read your own. Every time you type, you scroll the window on me. Stop doing that. Okay. This all looks the same. Impact ETA. Oh, you're doing it that way. Okay. So you're going by time. That's a good point. I wonder. That it can't be that bad because I'm not moving that much of a distance. I suppose, technically speaking, the closer I get to the surface, the smaller my radius from the planet center is, and therefore the higher the gravity is. But do you really think that makes a difference over only about 1,000 meters? Enough of a difference to matter? Well, if I'm trying to be this precise, it might. Okay, well, this code that HVAC put up is a pretty good idea. If you want, I can copy this and try it on the stream and we'll see what it does. So you say that what I need to run this is land anywhere and libmath somewhere? Libmath? Are you sure I don't need libpid as well? Okay, how do I use this web page? How do I obtain this? Okay, so I have two different requests that I'd like to do for people. One person wants me to put out the actual numbers in a graph form so we can look at them and see what's going on, and HVAC wants me to try out his script. Because I currently have my script loaded still, I'm going to first rerun mine giving some numbers, and then I'll rerun HVAC's. So let me print out these v-speed numbers to a file. Okay, so I'll run this one last time, this time trying to capture the log numbers. Brad, you didn't miss anything in the last 2 minutes other than the fact that I'm going to try running this one more time to give those graph numbers out, and then I'm going to switch to trying yours. So if you got to do a reboot, you might want to hurry up and get that out of the way in the next couple of minutes. I do like the way it looks when it switches to the next stage and actually you can see it tipping up. I kind of like that part of the script. How it reacts to changing the stage when it's trying to do the constant altitude burn. Alright. We'll see what's going on here soon. I really hope that I didn't screw up when I type that in and it ends up messing up right as it starts the suicide burn. If I was doing this in an actual career, I'd have my hand sitting right on the throttle ready to kick it in case the script screws up, but if I was doing this in remote tech, I couldn't do that anyway. Alright, and splam. Okay.